Did you watch The X-Files? Only to see if Mulder and Scully were ever going to get together. Law and Order SVU, because you want to see Stabler and Benson get it on? Then you should read David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Before we get to the review, I'm going to answer two questions. First one, did I enjoy reading the book? And the answer emphatically is yes. Do I ever want to reread David Copperfield? The answer is no. Welcome to Whiskey and Literature, where we read and discuss the greatest books of all time, the best stories that have ever been put to paper, and occasionally the worst book, and all those in between, because all the stories are ours. And while we're turning those pages, we're sipping those bottles of finely distilled spirits. I'm your host, Captain Mike. Thanks for being with me. Last year, I watched a video, the 50 greatest books of all time. I decided to read all 50 books in 2023, and I added 2 more to get to 52 books in 52 weeks. And I created this YouTube channel to share my experiences and reviews with you. This will be my 6th review of the year, David Copperfield. And I'll spoil the review by just upfront saying I thoroughly enjoyed this read. After Midnight's Children, a portrait of the artist as a young man, The Magic Mountain, Leaves of Grass, and Tristram Shandy, David Copperfield was a breath of fresh air. Thank you, Charles Dickens, for writing this story. And before we get to the book, let's talk about the author, Charles Dickens. He was an English author, born in 1812. He died in 1870. He's one of the best known authors ever. He created some of the most memorable characters ever. I mean, think about it. Oliver Twist, Pip, David Copperfield, Tiny Tim. All these were his creations. And oftentimes the places, people, events were modeled after his own life. He pioneered the serial type style of writing, where he would drip out his novels one volume at a time and often leave cliffhanger endings so his readers would come back for more and more. He even inspired a whole new industry where the illiterate would pay to have someone read the book out loud to them. The general public, they loved Charles Dickens because he spoke out on the plight of the poor people, and he challenged assumptions of the poor and the criminal. As I was telling Mrs. Captain about the life of Charles Dickens, his character was a bit soiled in her mind because I was telling her that at the age of 45, he abandoned his wife for an 18-year-old actress that he had hired for one of his plays. And also, as a mother, she was dismayed to hear his feelings, however well deserved they were, towards his own mother. We do try to remove artists' personal lives from their works, Michael Jackson, anyone, but sometimes there is some bleed over from their personal lives to the art. Okay, a quirky question for the author. Would I like to sit down with Charles Dickens and a nice pour of whiskey and talk about life, love, and happiness? And the answer is yes. And speaking of whiskey, our whiskey of the week is Weller Special Reserve, touted as the original wheated bourbon, the green label. I picked this bottle up for $22.99 at my local liquor store. It's a little more difficult to find these days. If you do find it, you're typically going to pay more than MSRP. But I know that at my local liquor store, if you show up on Thursdays at 10 a.m. when they open, they get the delivery that morning, and they probably have a bottle waiting just for you. But I've had the Woodford Reserve wheat whiskey recently, and I was surprised when I read the mash bill for this Weller Special Reserve. It says wheated bourbon, and it's only 18% wheat, which I understand is a little high for a bourbon. I just expected it to be higher. So a mash bill is 72% corn, 18% wheat, and 10% rye. I have had some. I have 3 bottles right now. This is the only bottle I've had open. So you can see I've had a couple pours out of here. It does drink like a $22 whiskey. It's very nice. I do like it. I like it a lot. But I like it at $22.99. If I paid a whole lot more than this for this bottle, I would be not quite as happy. In fact, the Woodford Reserve wheated whiskey is that was $31.99, And it is honestly a better whiskey, I think. It certainly smells like a bourbon. It's very sweet. Tasty notes are on the nose. It should be caramel. Tasty notes, a lot of honey. Those rich, typical bourbon notes. And it is very sweet. You can tell there's a little bit of rye in there, but it's pretty good. And certainly for $22. So I would recommend, if you can find yourself a bottle of Weller Special Reserve, pick it up, especially for $22.99. Okay, on to the specs and stats of the book. David Copperfield was released in serial format in 1849 and in the book format in 1850. It's a Bildungsroman type novel. I mean, the very first chapter is called I Am Born, and it goes all the way through his development into his later years. This copy of the book cost me $5.97, as it says on the front, and is 765 pages long. I actually originally purchased this copy of David Copperfield, but I didn't realize it was quite so large when I ordered it, and when it came, I was like, I don't like this format, and I don't want to carry it around to work. And the pages were just so long. I hate to read a page that's quite this long. It just seems like it takes me forever to be able to turn that page. I could turn those pages a little more rapidly. Audible has multiple narrations of this book, and the one that I chose was narrated by Martin Jarvis. And I was a little concerned about it because this was the free version, and I thought, well, maybe he would be a little subpar in his narration since it was free. But he did a great job. I can't compare him to the other narrators, but I thought Martin Jarvis did a fantastic job with the read of the book in Audible. David Copperfield is also available on the Kindle for free. I listened to probably half the book and read the other half, and I liked it both either way. I enjoyed the read, I enjoyed the listen when I was walking or commuting, and it was great both ways. This was Dickens' favorite book, or David Copperfield was his favorite character anyway, and many of the characters, places, events were taken from his personal life. I'm going to read to you just from the back of the book here. And as usual, I've got to put my glasses on even to read such a short amount. But he said, this is quote, Charles Dickens, I have in my heart of hearts a favorite child, and his name is David Copperfield. So again, semi-autobiographical. And is David Copperfield Charles Dickens? I think so. That's why he was written so well, and honestly, I'm in love with David Copperfield. This book also served as social commentary for many facets of life in England in the day. The criminal justice system, the educational system, the plight of women in marriage, and child labor in factories, etc. Guys, if you enjoy the content, like the video. It's free. If you want to see more of my reviews and the whiskey, subscribe. On to the book, the plot, and the structure of the novel. We begin with a birth. Chapter 1 is titled, I Am Born. We first see Clara Copperfield, David's mother, a young widow, and she's in the throes of childbirth when they are visited by David's aunt, Miss Trotwood. And she offers patronage to this young, poor widow for her newborn daughter. Unfortunately, David's a boy, and so Miss Trotwood, she left that very night and didn't come back to the house. Miss Copperfield, with the help of Miss Peggotty, raises David until she is married to Mr. Murdstone, our first villain of the story. Shortly after the marriage, Mrs. Murdstone, Mr. Murdstone's sister, moves in. And these two make the lives of everyone around them a living hell through strict discipline and requiring obedience. Young David Copperfield, he chafes under this oppression and rebels and is sent away to a boarding school where we meet Mr. Creakle, Traddles, and Steerforth. So one day, while at school, David is called to the office and hears that his mother has passed away. He returns home unwanted and neglected and is finally sent to London to work in Mr. Murdstone's factory. He does this for a while, and under these deplorable conditions, he just schemes and decides to run away to go visit his aunt Betsy Trotwood and see if she would offer him patronage and aid. She does, and we meet the amiable Mr. Dick. And from this moment, David Copperfield's life's trajectory goes up and up and up. And the plot is so deep, and we meet so many characters, it is almost impossible without this episode being so long to go into detail for all of the characters. Ham, Miss Peggotty, Mr. Peggotty, Little Emily, the Macabres, Mr. Wickfield, Sophie, Uriah Heep, Dr. Strong, Annie, Julie, Rosa Dartle, Dora, Littimer, Miss Moucher, and Agnes. The story is told in a linear fashion, rarely reflecting on the past or jumping forward in time. Occasionally, I, as the reader and some of the other characters who met Davy, were maybe a little confused about what age he was, but that was just due to his speech and bearing and presence. Okay, so now my thoughts on the book. And I hope that you can feel that this has been my favorite read of the year so far. A brief respite between much heavier books. I actually hardly annotated anything in this book. I feel like I've been reading books that if they were a lake, they would be a small lake, but very deep. Whereas David Copperfield is maybe a large lake, but very shallow. Not that there isn't any depth, but we have this story. It's very linear. There's not a lot of philosophizing or opining, or we're not jumping back and forth in time or reflecting. We're not parsing out the shades of meaning of every little thing that happens and everything that characters do or think or says. There were plenty of times where I laughed, I cried, and I exulted while I was reading this book. There were actually 3 times where I openly wept while reading David Copperfield. Once while walking through the neighborhood, I was listening as little Davy was called into the office and told that his mother had passed away. And Miss Peggotty's tenderness and love, it overwhelmed me with grief. And I was glad that day that I had sunglasses on to hide my tears. Much later, little Emily, who had been orphaned and was living with her uncle, Mr. Peggotty, and was stolen away. Mr. Peggotty was talking about his love and devotion for her and his determination to walk the ends of the earth to find her and bring her home. I was listening to this as I was walking along the beach, and his speech and his emotions and thoughts overwhelmed me. And I was glad that only the seagulls were there on the beach to witness my tears. And one other time, I was at work, and I was grateful that my coworker was asleep as I was surreptitiously wiping away the tears of grief that I had at Kip and Dora's passing. There are only a few books of all the books that I've read that I can remember crying or feeling this amount of grief in. One was Bridge to Terabithia. Have you read this book? Have you seen the movie? Well, I saw the movie, and I was at the Country Inn and Suites, and sorry to this hotel, I kept this book. They have a lending library, and I was there for a while doing some training in Denver, and I had picked this book up and went over to the Outback Steakhouse and was reading this book while I was just by myself eating. And I've seen the movie, so I knew the story. And in the first part of the book, I'm reading this, and the kids are so gay and happy, and they're playing, and they love each other, and they're loving life. And I knew how the story ended, and I knew the tragedy that awaited them. And I was overwhelmed by grief as they were having such a wonderful time because I knew what was about to come upon them. And that's one of the few times, besides Charles Dickens' David Copperfield, that I've read and wept in a book. I would like to read from page 576 in the book. So the glasses are coming out. As a little backstory, one of the characters, Dr. Strong, he had a very young wife, as many people in this book do. And there was some doubt that was created in his mind as to her fidelity. And David Copperfield and some friends basically held an intervention to be able to help them to reconcile. And Dr. Strong's young wife is speaking to him. And this was the only part in the entire book that I marked up and I listened to and appreciated and noted. I'd like to read this to you. So with that backstory, so Annie, the young wife, is talking to her husband as they're reconciling. She says, "It was at that time that Mama was most solicitous about my cousin Malden. I had liked him," she spoke softly, but without any hesitation, "very much. We had been little lovers once. If circumstances had not happened otherwise, I might have come to persuade myself that I really loved him, and might have married him, and been most wretched. There can be no disparity in marriage like unsuitability of mind and purpose." And those words, that last sentence, had a profound effect on David Copperfield. And she continues, "There is nothing," said Annie, "that we have in common. I have long found that there is nothing. If I were thankful to my husband for no more, instead of for so much, I should be thankful to him for having saved me from the first mistaken impulse of my undisciplined heart." So there's two phrases in here. There can be no disparity in marriage like unsuitability of mind and purpose. And the words, the impulse of my undisciplined heart. Both those struck David Copperfield. If you read the book, he at this time is married to Dora. And she sounds like a little doll, a beautiful little girl who is completely helpless and almost worthless at home, unsuitable to any task of domesticity. And David Copperfield is a little frustrated at this point with her. And those two phrases, an unsuitability of mind and purpose and my undisciplined heart, he references over and over again. As I was reading this book, in the difficult times, I wanted to comfort David. At other times, I wanted to shout at him into the book, "No, David, don't believe him. He's a scoundrel. Don't be fooled." I wanted to say to him, "No, David, not Miss Shepherd, Agnes. No, David, not Miss Larkins, Agnes. Always Agnes. Not Dora, Agnes." Understand why he didn't come to me and ask me for advice. It reminded me of my own kids who sometimes make decisions which I'm like, I don't need you to heed my advice, but at least consult me and ask me. I have some experience, and maybe what I say to you could help you out. This book, I felt like, was a great book. It even ended well. Chapters 60 and 63 were exceptional. A story is well told that ends on a high note. Every one of us, you and I, deserve to have a friend like David Copperfield. He is fiercely loyal, unconditionally loving, and always up for a good time. I hope that I can be half as good a friend as he is to my friends and loved ones. Folks, you need to pick up a copy of David Copperfield. You're welcome. Okay. Next up, The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. This will be the first Hemingway book that I have ever read. Thank you, my friends. I hope you're reading something great. For now, turn those pages and stay thirsty.